What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. In today's video, we are going to be going over my Madden 23 wish list. We're going to be going over 10 items that I feel can be added to Madden 23 and absolutely should be added to 23 in order to expand upon franchise mode. Now, the first of those topics is going to be something I've already covered in an individual video, so I won't go too in-depth on it, but that is an improved in-season free agency system. Whenever we go into free agency within the current game, there's not really a lot out here available for us to do. You can simply sign players to a predetermined one-year contract with no signing bonus or anything of that nature, but I would like some additions to this. Player desires, depth chart requirements, playing time requirements, things of that nature should all be added into the game and are going to go hand in hand with the off-season improvements that I'm going to be talking about in another point. One thing that I'd like to bring up that I think that a lot of people tend to say is, players don't normally sign multi-year deals in season. That is generally correct, but a lot of UDFAs will sign 3-year deals to hang around with a team or things of that nature. So there should be the ability to determine how to negotiate the contract with this player as opposed to just a predetermined one-year contract. Number 2 on my franchise wish list is another one that I already covered as well, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this one, and that is a skills reduction for players signed to your team that week or for a week or two. In franchise mode, it is certainly way too prevalent where users will simply go out and sign the highest overall free agent if a player on their team goes down with injury, as opposed to pulling players from their practice squad. That's not how the NFL actually operates. Players are often raised up from the practice squad to fill voids on the roster due to injury or things of that nature, and I believe that they could implement a very simple system in order to influence users to utilize their practice squad more often. And by doing so, you're going to help improve the franchise experience and the depth of the franchise experience, and all you really have to do in order to do this is when you sign a free agent during the season, they either have a temporary skills reduction or they're just simply not able to play depending on their position, especially like quarterback, for example. They're not able to play for a week or two, something of that nature. I don't care how you implement this system. It doesn't have to be super complex, but there can be a very simple system put in place to influence users to pull from their practice squad as opposed to free agents during the season. The next thing that I want to talk about, and this is number 3 on my list, is improvements to the existing/added scouting system within the game. I don't mind the direction that the scouting system went this year within Madden 22, but they need to make improvements to the way that it operates in Madden 23. Namely, they need to improve the percentages on these players. I'm not saying that you should have 100% of the skills evaluated for every single one of these players, but when 90% of the class is coming in, and I shouldn't even say that, 99% of the class is coming in with 40 or 50% completion on them, that is very unrealistic. What ends up happening is your scouts don't actually operate past like week 12 or week 14 within your Madden system, but that assumes that these guys aren't working for these organizations past that point, and that's just simply not true. Scouts in real life are operating year-round within the organization to scout film, scout tape, and determine which players are going to be drafted for this team come draft day. There's a lot more information had on these players than we're actually getting within the current scouting update, and that needs to be improved upon. Being that they took this time and effort to put this scouting update in, I feel like they should have no problem improving what is actually being given to us. For example, most of the players should come in with a majority of their points or their attributes scouted, or maybe not a majority, but somewhere in the range of 70%, something of that nature. You should have more information on the majority of these players, especially the top players within the class. Some of the lower end players aren't going to be scouted quite as much, and that's fine, but when you come in with almost every single player in the first round only at 40, 45, 45, maybe 55% completion on scouting, that is extremely unrealistic, and they need to do a better job of representing how many people are actually out there scouting for these organizations and the information that they are actually getting in and compiling for these organizations. I would say that these organizations are million, if not billion-dollar companies and have the ability to pay hefty scouting teams to go out and get information for them that we just simply aren't getting here within the current scouting update. And the next thing to discuss here would be updated terminology in terms of how the NFL actually refers to players now, especially during scouting and things like that. Yes, within certain organizations and certain systems, the left end, right end, left outside linebacker, right outside linebacker, D tackle positions still exist, but generally speaking, on a macro scale, the NFL speaks in terms of edge rushers and interior defensive linemen. They also speak in terms of linebackers. So having those distinctions and grouping those players together would be much more effective for the scouting system within the game and also bring the game up to date with the current NFL. We're talking about terminology that has been outdated here for 10, 15, 20 years now, and we're well beyond the point of talking about these players in terms of defensive end, outside linebacker, D tackle, and things of that nature. So we should be talking about these on a more macro scale in the way that the NFL actually looks at these players. Next up, I want to talk about an improved player rating regression system within franchise mode. I think most of us can agree that it is a little bit too easy to build a super team within Madden franchise mode. And the reason for that is that it is almost impossible to lose overall and lose ratings and lose ability on players that already have it within the franchise. You're talking about players that are going to keep their superstar rating or X Factor rating even if they have a down season. You're talking about players that are going to remain in the 90s even if they don't perform and have a certain number of sacks or have a certain number of passing touchdowns or passing yardage and things of that nature. Oftentimes, this is prevalent in user leagues because you'll have players that significantly underperform. For example, you might have a Khalil Mack type of a player who averages 8 or 9 sacks a season now, is not as big of an impact, but could remain as a 99 overall X Factor player, when in reality, the game should have some system in place to reduce that player's overall or that player's development. Players that underperform within the game should be reduced over time and should be accounted for. Instead, the game just progresses players at a very fast pace, but never catches up on regression for those players. Even at older ages, players don't regress necessarily as quickly as they could or should. So there needs to be a system put in place for underperforming players, especially to be reduced in overall. I think that overalls and devs should be completely fluid within franchise mode based on past performance and current performance. Players that have been successful for a very long time should be less likely to drop in overall, but players that have negative seasons and seasons where they don't produce even when they play an entire season should probably be getting negatives to their attributes and their development so that they are not being overrated in compared to other players within the league, and so that franchises and teams within those franchises don't become too high overall and too stacked or too OP in the long run. A fantastic example of this that I wanted to give you guys in this video is Mac Jones within this user franchise, for example. Mac Jones is an 80 overall star quarterback at 23 years old, meaning that this guy is going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the league within a couple of seasons simply by playing the game. However, when you look at his stats over the past 2 seasons, he certainly does not deserve, in my opinion, to retain that 80 overall star rating. You're talking about a quarterback that averages about a 76 or 77 passer rating and throws more interceptions than he does touchdowns. that is an extremely negative performance for a player, but Madden never has any system in place to take that into account. Instead of us taking that into account as users and having to manually edit these players and account for their performances, there should be a simple system in place to say, hey, this guy threw more interceptions than anybody in NFL history. He should probably not have star dev, or he should probably go down in overall, or his awareness should go down. Something of that nature certainly needs to be put into place. The next thing that I want to talk about is a system to develop players behind veterans, players that don't necessarily play, because this is something that we've seen within the NFL for a long time. There are teams that don't start their first overall draft picks or first round draft picks because they want them to sit and learn the system and learn the speed of the game before they ever come in. However, the game may take away their ability, might take away their dev, I should say, and may not develop them in any significant way. The way that it currently works is you have to play young players in order to develop them. You have to get them playing time, you have to get them stats in order to see any reasonable development with those players. And that's just simply not correct. Players can develop by sitting and learning the system, and they can break out in their second year, third year, things of that nature, but that's not necessarily the case within Madden. In Madden, users are always trying to start their youngest players, most athletic players, and we want to try to influence users to not have to do that, to start their veteran players, use their veteran players. And a great example of that would be the drafting of Jordan Love behind Aaron Rodgers. Yes, he is now a 76 overall star, but that took some editing by us as a league in order to improve him and account for some of the development that is likely going on behind the scenes with him sitting there and learning from an elite Hall of Fame quarterback. Now, we know that they necessarily don't have to like each other. You know, for example, Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre supposedly didn't like each other back then, but I guarantee you that Aaron Rodgers learned a lot from Brett Favre and the way that he played. Might have taken some positives and some negatives that helped to shape his game. What I'm saying, though, is there needs to be some system in place, again, that users don't have to go in and influence this ourselves, where you can draft a young player and have them sit and develop without having to be plugged into the starting lineup right away. The next topic that I want to talk about is really a combination of two topics, but I want to make sure that I hit on both of them, and that is improved off-season free agency and re-signing players and contract structuring. All of that stuff really kind of combines into one category for me, and again, this is going to pull a lot of ideas that I've already talked about with the improved in-season free agency in terms of player desires, playing time potential for these players, depth chart requirements for these players, many factors that go into these players making decisions in real life that aren't currently included within the system. For example, it's just a straight up point system on whether or not I am going to get this player or not, and I can just simply increase and decrease my offer and know whether I'm the player that is actually going to sign this guy or not. Now I know that I'm getting Devontae Adams because my bid system is the highest, and it's only broken down into a couple of minor categories, and that is the salary, the bonus, the length, and the team prestige, which are not the only factors that go into deciding whether this player plays, signs. Whether this player signs with a team is determined on what role that player is going to have with the team, what potential does that player have with the team, is this a place where that player would want to play, is it close to home, various different things that have already been included in past EA games. Namely, we can talk about things like NCAA football back in the day, where you could sit down with these players and have conversations with these players and talk about their wants, their needs, and address those things. Those should definitely be included in off-season free agency. However, what we also need to do is we need to hide the bid details so that we don't always know whether we're the top bid or not. Number one, that creates a super unhealthy system where players just outbid each other for free agents at unreasonable prices. You should have everybody submitting what they feel is a reasonable offer to this player, maybe a little bit of an excessive offer to this player, but we shouldn't have people bidding up to the max and bidding max deals on positions that aren't quarterbacks, for example, every single time they hit free agency. That just simply isn't realistic, and we could certainly improve upon that system. And then we also need to improve CPU logic. A lot of times whenever you get to the end of free agency, you'll see a lot of veteran free agents out here that are pretty solid that should be able to sign with teams. But at that point, teams are generally speaking in the NFL going to sign these guys to 1-year veteran minimum contracts and things like that. And you should have improved CPU logic so that they can also participate in those bids. However, these players don't have the logic to sign those contracts because they're still looking at the end of free agency for a long-term deal or a high money deal, even though they know that they're not going to get it, or in real life, you know that they're not going to get it. So there needs to be an improved kind of step to the system where, in week 1, yeah, everybody's asking for the most money, but in week 4 of off-season free agency, you realize, or these players realize, hey, I need to just get myself on a team because I want to continue to make money. I want to continue to get paid. I want to stay around in the NFL. So I'm going to sign a 1-year veteran minimum. Your CPU teams need to be able to get in on those bids, and the logic for that system needs to be put in place properly so that it can be executed properly. Then the final thing that groups in with that topic is front-loaded contracts, back-loaded contracts, and the ability to extend contracts prior to a player being up for negotiation. Sometimes within the NFL, players will extend their contract well ahead of time. Patrick Mahomes, for example, extended his contract well before his rookie deal was up. This is a player that said, you know what, in the future, I'm going to get this deal done for myself and take advantage of my play right now to get a deal done for myself multiple years into the future. Instead, in Madden, every player has to be negotiated whenever their contract is up. And then a feature that they added into the game that I actually like a little bit is the hidden dev and overall of a player within the draft. So let's say, for example, that I draft this quarterback, Greg Rushing. He is a question mark overall hidden dev player. I feel like they are going in this direction, and I'm hopeful that this is actually going to be a future feature in the game, but I feel as though that overall and dev should be hidden until that player plays a certain number of years within the league or a certain number of snaps within the league. All I have to do is after the draft, I can immediately go to these players, I can view what their overall is, and then I can hit edit player and I can go view what their dev actually is. And I feel like all of that should be hidden for an extended period of time within the game for a couple of different reasons. Number one, you don't know what you're getting whenever you draft any rookie in the NFL. It's a guessing game, and those players can be a little bit fluid in terms of depending on what team they go to and what system they go to, they might be good in one and bad in another. They might be a good fit or a bad fit. And so I think that these things need to be hidden for a significantly longer period of time. And I really truly believe that a player's ratings and their development trait need to be fluid behind the scenes and hidden so that that player can change based on their performance and things of that nature. Let's say we have a quarterback that comes in and throws for 40 touchdowns. We don't know what his overall is. We don't know what his dev is. Maybe he was drafted as a 65 overall normal development player, but behind the scenes, since everything's hidden and it's fluid, that player now, because of their performance, can be a superstar dev 85 overall player or 80 overall player or something of that nature behind the scenes up until the point where you have all of that revealed after a certain amount of playing time. I feel like that would be a really cool way of doing it and a more realistic way to represent how rookies actually play and how this system actually plays out within the NFL. You really don't know what a player's overall is. You don't really know how good a player is going to be or what their ceiling is or what their floor is until you get them on the field or until you get them into the locker room and you can evaluate some of those things. And then my final 2 points here are things that I feel like are super easy to put into the game and definitely should be put into the game and are just right now a lack of attention to detail. And that is number 1, a special teams depth chart. I know a lot of people don't give a crap about this, but this is something that I've been preaching for a long time. If you can put in every single player at every single position that you have within your roster and you can edit who's on the field and when, why can't I edit who's blocking for me on a kick return? Why can't I edit who's going down and covering on a kickoff? I don't like having my starters out there on kickoff coverage. For some reason, it glitches. And I know that people say that, well, there's ways that you can get around that. You can put them at a certain spot on your depth chart. You can, put certain players at certain spots on your depth chart, and you know that those are the players that are going to go out on kickoff coverage or kickoff return. Well, the sad thing is the kickoff coverage and kick return, for example, already pulls players from your roster and puts them out on the field, which means there has to be a system in place already that we just simply don't see and have control of. So my plea to EA is, if you give me nothing else off this list, please give me a special teams depth chart for kickoff and kickoff return so that I can get the right personnel out there on the field blocking for me and the right personnel out there on the field tackling the ball carrier for me, because that stuff is so annoying to me and that definitely needs to be added to the game. It is so basic, there's no excuse for it not to be in the game. And then my final entry on this list is going to be attention to offensive linemen within the game, and that's going to include multiple things. First and foremost, we all know that you can't get dev increases with offensive linemen, which is just simply unacceptable. Why can you get dev increases with every single other position, but an offensive lineman can't improve the way that they play and become a star player within the league, a star lineman within the league? You're talking about players that oftentimes take a while to develop, that take a while to get strong enough to play at the NFL level, that take time to develop into really good linemen at that level. And it's just, this is, again, an attention to detail thing that is, there's no excuse for it. There should be the ability to progress your development as a lineman within Madden franchise mode. You should also have the ability to track stats for offensive linemen. That would be pancake blocks, various different things for offensive linemen that is going to help influence whether they get a dev upgrade or not. Then the other thing that I think is extremely sad is the complete lack of X-Factor abilities for offensive linemen within the game. I mean, you're talking about every single other position has X factors except for offensive line. Why? What is the justification for that? Is it just simply that you don't believe that there's any offensive lineman that has an impact on an NFL game that much that they can be considered an X factor? Well, that's simply not true. Offensive linemen can impact a game in that way. You can talk about some of the best linemen in the league. Quentin Nelson, for example, who would be the prototypical X factor within the game, doesn't have an X factor ability. Again, like I said, this is a complete lack of attention to detail, and for there to not be X-Factor linemen or X-Factor abilities for linemen within the game is absolutely absurd. And I think that a lot of this stems from them not tracking offensive linemen stats properly, so there's no good way for them to implement, oh, this is when this guy gets their X-Factor ability activated, or this is when this guy gets an improvement from normal to star dev or star to superstar dev, because they don't track the stats that would trigger those things. So that all comes back to my final note on this, which is better stat tracking for offensive linemen. Go out there and find somebody to talk to that knows all about offensive linemen and tell them what they look for to determine whether a player is improving, whether a player is doing well, or whether a player is doing poorly, and implement that into the game so that we can get proper functioning systems here with offensive linemen that reflect the way the NFL works and reflect or parallel the other positions that you've already done this for within the game. To me, there's no excuse for the lack of attention to detail with offensive line in the game, especially when it is maybe the most important position in all of football. So that is going to be my top 10 list, my franchise wish list for Madden 23. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. What is on your list? What was on my list that wouldn't be on your list? What would you add to this list? Various different things. Just let me know your comments and your thoughts down in the comment section below. I know that this is a lofty goal, and I feel like a lot of these things shouldn't be that hard to implement. I legitimately picked things that should be pillars of a franchise mode. But again, we don't get get them each year. So it's just a waiting game to see if they actually listen to us and add some things into the game. You know, recent news suggests maybe they're not even going to give us any updates to franchise mode at all. So we'll see. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed this one. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and comment down below. Like I said, I'll see you guys in the next one, and I hope you have a good one.